Harold Munro, editor-in-chief at the Vancouver Sun and Province, and joining me is Dan Fumano, City Hall columnist for the Vancouver Sun and Province. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Harold.
Hey, so you spent much of last week, lucky you, with mayors and councillors at their annual general meeting, the Union of BC Municipalities Conference in Vancouver. What were your big takeaways talking to folks who were there?
Yeah, as you say, it's an annual event. You have hundreds of different politicians, mayors, councillors, municipal staff from all parts of BC. So, big cities, small towns, rural areas, and they all get together and they're all trying to get the attention and ask questions to provincial politicians and various other people who are there as well. Not shocking. One of the big things that we kept hearing about was housing. Same as, other years, we were hearing about housing challenges and how they are playing out in different parts of the province. But definitely we're hearing that it's not just like a big city issue or, a Vancouver and Victoria issue. It's something that's all different communities of different sizes are having housing challenges, whether it's some communities were saying that they're trying to approve a lot more housing and they're doing what they can at City Hall or Town Hall to approve way more housing, more units, but there's not always the skilled trades and the construction staff there that they need to build the stuff, or for various reasons, projects are getting approved, but in this challenging financial climate, maybe they don't advance. The high cost of labor, the high cost of materials, construction is getting more and more expensive. So sometimes projects aren't getting built. And they also talked about, city halls can do what they can to try to approve more housing. And they say they want to welcome more residents and add more homes for them. But there's worries about the infrastructure that they need to support these new residents, which a lot of times are require money from senior governments. So you had municipal politicians, and again, I think this is the kind of thing that happens all the time. It's not new this year, but it is happening at a time where the federal government has increased its immigration targets to the highest levels in recent memory. And we know that a lot of those people are going to settle in Metro Vancouver and other parts of BC. So you had some of the councillors from these high growth parts of BC, like Langley, for example. Langley's growing very quickly, approving lots of new housing. And politicians were asking, provincial cabinet ministers, what guarantees do we have that the province is going to be there to build the hospitals that we need, the schools that we need? Because municipalities can approve the housing, but they're not the ones who foot the bill for building new hospitals and schools.
Right. And they're only a year into their 4-year term, but they're looking ahead and they're thinking, if I want to get reelected, I have to make sure that the NIMBYs don't jump up and attack me because the infrastructure isn't there to support all this housing we're approving. Eventually, it comes home to roost for them, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even people who are supportive of more housing don't they just want to see infrastructure and services keep pace and for schools to be able to handle the populations that are going to be living there. And it's I've written about this before. This is an old issue that there often seems to be a disconnect between municipal governments and provincial governments. We see it here in Vancouver where there's a new school gets promised for some new neighborhood that's growing really quickly. But years and years later, once families have started moving in there, there's no movement on building the new school. It's a big frustration that we hear about all the time in certain parts of Vancouver that are growing quickly, whereas other parts of Vancouver, school populations are actually declining. But then you have high growth areas like Surrey and stuff where tons of new families, young families, children, and school construction just doesn't seem to keep pace with the residential growth.
Right. So that'll be a big issue, I guess, as we head into year 2 of this council mandate in Vancouver. With Ken Sim and his ABC majority. So what are you looking for over the next? I mean, it's hard to predict. There's always things that come up that you weren't expecting. But what do you expect the next 12 months to bring us starting this fall?
Well, one of the major, a big part of Ken Sim and ABC's campaign was about speeding up housing approvals, getting more housing built more quickly. they spent a lot of time pledging that they were going to dramatically reduce the amount of time it takes to get housing approved in the city of Vancouver, and then just do what they could to try to make sure that they go from approvals to actual construction to completion to occupancy, not just getting approved and then nothing happens. They want to see more units getting approved and actually built. So we should, I think, expect over the next part of their term and potentially over the next year, some movement on trying to pursue those policies, because they haven't introduced a lot of significant new housing policies of their own since getting elected. They have approved some of the major changes that had been kind of initiated by previous councils, most recently with the multiplex, allowing sort of densification up to 6 or in some cases even 8 units on a single lot, depending on lot size, in some of the lower density parts of town. So the ABC Majority Council approved that. It was approved unanimously. But, that's work that had sort of been initiated under previous councils. But I think it's fair to say that we'll expect to hear more from ABC. One thing I'm expecting to hear about quite soon is I think council is going to direct staff to look at the shadow and view protection policies. So the city has all these policies in place around, if you build this building here, it's going to block the view of the North Shore Mountains or block that view. And it is something that we hear about from developers, from builders. They would like to see these policies relaxed to try to get more housing built, also more offices and other kinds of buildings. And it's something that we've heard the mayor talk about in a lot of speeches when he goes and speaks to various industry and business groups, or he talks about, we have a housing crisis in Vancouver. We don't have a shadow crisis or a view crisis. We need to get more housing built. So I've heard him say that at a number of different speeches that I've attended to members of the public, outside groups, but they haven't actually initiated anything on the floor of council to direct staff to actually make any changes there or investigate changes. I think that will be coming soon. There's been
that'll be controversial too. I mean, there's always people who are concerned about that, especially if your view is affected. You're going to be concerned. But
of course, for sure. It'll be and the shadows. I mean, there's these debates about how stringent do our shadow policies need to be. Have people having access to natural light is seen as important, but there's a bunch of trade-offs.
Well, you hear I don't know how true they are, but you hear anecdotes about how if a shadow there's like 5 days a year where the shadow might impinge upon this building, and therefore it can't be allowed.
We hear these kinds of anecdotal stories. It's hard to. I don't know exactly, but
exactly.
I think pretty soon council is going to be directing staff to do some of that work, looking at it. Another big change that's going to be coming to the city, and then within the next 12 months, well, probably less, is that the city is going to have to hire a new head of planning. So just last week, the city announced that its chief planner, Teresa O'Donnell, was departing the role, or they had decided not to continue her appointment in that role. And they wouldn't provide any details about her departure or, how, if she's being paid severance or how much. They kind of said, we're not going to answer any questions about personnel. Both the city and, the politicians said they're not going to answer personnel questions. But O'Donnell's departure is a significant thing because she, that role, being the general manager of planning and urban design and sustainability, I think is the full title. It's one of the most senior, powerful, and high-profile roles at City Hall. It's the head of the planning department, and so it's a pretty high-profile role. And O'Donnell had been in that role for just a little more than 2 years after her predecessor Gil Kelly was in the role for a few years. And so there has been a significant amount of turnover in that senior role because Kelly's predecessor was only in it for a couple of years. So over the last number of years, there's been a fair amount of turnover in that role for what is such a senior role. So it'll be interesting to see who comes in there and, what their kind of what they see as their top priorities in that role.
Yes. Okay. The other thing, the other move by the city was the scrapping of the Vancouver Economic Commission. Mayor Sim described it as a transfer of services to create efficiencies and streamline, supports for local businesses. I'm sure that most Vancouver residents have probably never even heard of the commission. what did they do? And, what happens now?
Yeah. So, as you say, it was kind of described as finding efficiencies. The Vancouver Economic Commission had been operating since the 1990s, and it's
Like almost 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or 30 years, I guess. 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the way it was described by the city is that now there will be a new sort of business development office that'll operate out of the city manager's office. So it'll be a little bit of a less of like sort of an arm's length thing. The Economic Commission was responsible for developing business opportunities and promoting economic growth in the city. And they largely, at least in recent years, had focused on sort of clean tech, green technology kinds of companies, as well as the film and TV production industries. And they were just sort of seen as an office that tried to facilitate business to happen in the city of Vancouver. And I know that in the announcement, the city said that, they're going to have this new business development office within the city manager's office. And they also mentioned Invest Vancouver, which is a sort of broader regional group that promotes economic growth across Metro Vancouver. So not specific to city of Vancouver, the way the VEC was. But so in a way, it kind of reminded me of when the ABC Majority Council decided not to continue the city of Vancouver's renter's office. This was something that the idea of having a city office specifically to support the needs of tenants in the city of Vancouver. That was something that it was relatively new. It just came in under the previous mayor, Kennedy Stewart, and his sort of mixed council. They had started up this renter's office, and then fairly early in the ABC Majority Council's term, they decided to discontinue that renter's office. And essentially, they're saying the same thing. They wanted to support tenant services in their own way by providing space for provincial kind of organizations to operate and providing grants. But they were saying they didn't want to be duplicating the services. They didn't think the city needed to duplicate the services of these provincial organizations. Now, then as in now, it will be controversial with some people. People will say getting rid of this organization is a mistake. They were doing important work. Here's why it's not a straight duplication of services that are being provided elsewhere. But, that's the decision they made. And, by the estimates we've heard from the city, the disbandment of the Vancouver Economic Commission will save a couple $1 million a year for the city budget. And this comes at a time when there's a lot of pressure on the budget because of collective agreements, because of ABC Majority Council needing to pay for hiring these additional police that they've promised and the additional nurses that they've promised, things that seem to resonate with voters, but need to be paid for somehow.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. Okay. Well, it's going to be an exciting year ahead. I'm glad we're starting this video series, Dan, and look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Harold.